Those Forking Fangirls, where we talk all things nerdy, book, TV, movie, pop culture fandoms, and how they integrate into our adult lives. This is episode 7. I'm Christine.
And I'm Natasha.
And today we are talking about the concept of, quote, growing out of YA. And if you're unfamiliar, YA is young adult literature. We've, spent the last 10 years really in it. And it's been a concept that a lot of people talk about how they've grown out of YA. And we're going to be digging into, can you grow out of YA? Is that the way to frame what's happening as you grow older? And what kind of content are we leaning toward now in the book world? We're going to really dig into that. But before we get to our main discussion, as always, we're going to dive into our Snap Crackle pop culture news. And Natasha, take us away. What is happening this week?
Take us away. Okay, so there's a lot of movie stuff happening. The first one being, there wasn't a lot of news, okay? So I'm really just pulling at strings here.
I didn't have any news. This is all you that you
put in. I'll just fill it up.
I'm not sure.
So Avatar: The Way of Water is finally releasing after 15 years. Is that what it's called?
The Way of Water?
Well, the whole movie is pretty much, I guess, set in water. So they filmed it all underwater, and that's the big thing.
Spoilers.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It's called The Way of Water, though.
I've avoided these spoilers for so long. I didn't even know what it was called because I've been avoiding it so hard. It's okay.
It's coming out, I think, on the 16th of December.
Oh my
and
God, so
everyone
soon.
was saying it was going to run for 5 hours, but the official runtime is 3 hours and 12 minutes.
I mean,
so it's
to
not
be
5 hours.
expected, yeah.
I just want
they would never release a
clear that up.
5-hour film in the theater. It's just not conducive.
But they have pretty much already filmed number 3, and they have parts. They have parts of number 4.
It's been long enough. I would hope that they're ready for the next 4, because aren't they planning 1 million? I just don't understand why he has so many planned. For the rest of his life, James Cameron is going to be making Avatar.
Also, the movie has to make $2 billion in the box office for it to even make back what it spent to break even, pretty much.
Wow. I mean, I'm excited for it, but I'm not excited for it to the point where I feel like it's going to make that much money because it took so long to come out. I guess we'll see. I mean, it is James Cameron and he has a really great track record, but I feel like he's kind of dying on the hill of Avatar, so I have faith in him. I just really hope that it pans out the way he's planned.
He hopes. Yeah. I mean, because he beat out, Avengers Endgame because he re-released Avatar back in theater.
I mean, Avatar and Titanic.
Are they really that big of...
Avatar and Titanic are 2 of the highest grossing films of all time. So he's got the pull to make these films, but if the first one doesn't do as well as he wants to, how long can he go is the question. So we'll see. I hope it goes well.
So a couple trailers released. There's the new Indiana Jones movie. It's number 5.
There's another Indiana Jones. Oh yeah, I forgot. Isn't Harrison Ford in it? Okay.
Yes, the typical Indiana Jones. Alex had me watch that trailer, and the trailer was really good. They're de-aging Harrison Ford, and he looks really good. So they didn't really choose another actor to play him. They just de-aged him down.
It's so weird when they do that. I don't know if you watched the Martin Scorsese movie with Robert De Niro. What was it called? Irish, something with the Irish. I was so weirded out by young Robert De Niro because while he looked young. He walked like an old man. Like he still had old movements. So they haven't perfected that. And I hope that that's not the case with Indiana Jones, but I don't know really how you make an old man walk young. You'd have to CGI his whole body. So
That's true.
He just doesn't
It's like
have the
I
pep
wish
in
they
the
would
step.
just get like a young.
Yeah, a young
I
actor
wish
to
they would
play
just get like a
him.
young actor.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a guy who like literally plays Harrison Ford young. He was in Age of
Shia
Adeline.
LaBeouf?
No. Age of Adeline. Remember?
But I enjoyed Shia LaBeouf in the fourth one with the aliens.
Yeah. Yes, and Kate Blanchett.
I don't remember her, but I do remember Shia because I loved him back then. Anyway.
Yes. And then they just dropped the new Guardians of the Galaxy trailer, the third one.
Ooh.
I'm not going to go into it. Alex had me watch it. I was like, I don't want to watch this.
I'm not watching
like,
it.
It's the
No
only
way.
thing I'm going to say, it just gave me anxiety, and I'm not really excited, but I am.
What do you mean? Okay, don't tell me anything.
They
I
just
don't
show,
want to
I feel like it's
Don't-
too emotional. I
don't.
don't want to talk about it.
Don't say it. I did watch the Christmas special and had a grand old time this week. I was laughing hysterically while I was doing yoga watching it. I texted my
It's
brother.
hilarious.
I was like, you have to watch the Christmas special. All right, well, that's a good segue into our What Right Now segment. But before we dive into What Right Now, we quickly want to thank our new patrons this week. And Natasha, do you wanna share who our new patrons are this week?
Yes, so we have Elizabeth P., Cameron, Allison A., Cecilia, Katie M., Julia K., Amanda S., Jessica B., Paperback Pastelitos. Oh, okay. And Melissa. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank
for
you guys.
supporting us on Patreon.
Thank you so much. If you don't know, we have a Patreon where we offer fun perks, our biggest being our half-an-hour extra show called Fangirl Tea Time, where we talk about more personal stories and more personal stuff going on in our lives. So if you're interested in checking that out, it's patreon.com/those4kingfangirls. And that's not, you don't have to be a patron to support the pod. You can follow us for free on your favorite podcast app so you get the show every week. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel for the visual version, which is youtube.com/@those4kingfangirls. And or you can review the pod. Did I already say review the pod? No, I didn't.
Review
You
and
can
rate?
review it. Review and rate the pod on your favorite podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Super easy, super helpful for us. Thank you so much for everything you've done to help spread the word. Telling a friend, telling anyone. Everything is so helpful. Thank you. All
yeah,
right.
and if you're watching this visually, hi everyone.
Yes,
It would
hi.
be really helpful if you could give us a like, and we also love to read your comments too. So thank you.
We do. We love them so much. Thank you for your comments. They make it feel like people are watching. Like we can see that people are listening and watching, but it doesn't feel real unless people like are commenting or saying something. It's like, oh, okay. Someone heard and someone has thoughts, and that's amazing. All right, let's move on to What Right Now. Natasha, what have you been reading this week?
Nothing. I've not been reading anything for like last 2 weeks.
Oh, man.
I know.
I have really been enjoying my reading time because it's my excuse almost not to be writing, but also it calms my system. I've talked about this before, but like it's my anti-anxiety. So when I feel like I need a break, I take out my book and it's like my self-care to sit and read for 20 minutes. So I've been reading After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I had started last time we talked. And it's, I it's not like a really happy, uplifting book. It's about a woman who's having marital issues. She's been with her husband for 9 years, and they got married when they were young, right out of college. And they've always been really, really in love. But the past 2 years, or definitely the past year, there's been a disconnect, and they've started to resent each other, and they decide to take a year apart. So they're separated for a year. And it's her like figuring out how to live without him, and then realizing that she can, and trying to figure out if she wants to try to make the marriage work or if they're better off separated. And while it's not like making me feel all warm and fuzzy, it's fascinating to me in the same way that I've become fascinated with reading about like mothers and, you know, having a kid. And it's fascinating to read about marriage and how it's affected this woman who's 30. She's all, you know, she's right around my age, but she's already been married for so long, and how it's affected her mindset and all of that. And I'm really enjoying it as much as I can enjoy a book that's not like making me laugh like like that. It's very interesting, and the characters are really well done, and I'm relating to a lot of different aspects of it that I'm really enjoying. So I'm excited to keep reading all of Taylor Jenkins Reid's backlist. I'm almost done with this. I'm at that point where I can't stop reading it. So last night I was like, I should just finish this. But then I was like, we have to get up early for the pod, so stop reading. What have you watched this week?
As far as movies go, I've been rewatching a lot of stuff with Alex. So the only really new thing I've watched is the Noel Diary. It's one of those like cheesy Netflix movies, and
I saw that with Justin Hartley from This Is Us.
I'm glad to say it's much better than the Lindsay Lohan movie.
That's good. It has a good rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and I was very surprised.
It still has like, you know, the cheesiness of like a Christmas Hallmark movie, but I think the acting's really good, and I think it's really heartfelt. So that's all I've really watched besides our rewatches, which is like our, you know, favorite Christmas movies and all the feel-good stuff around this time. Mm-hmm. What about you?
I watched Bros, and I had the best time. It was so good. The dialogue was so fantastic, and I was just laughing my head off. So if you don't know, this is a rom-com from Billy Eichner. And so it's a gay rom-com, and it's the first one that was really in theaters. And I think, unfortunately, it didn't do well in the box office, which is really sad because it's really good. And it's on Peacock now, so definitely recommend checking it out. Yeah, he's just very funny in ways that I never expect, you know? Like, he just says all this, like, randomly this really clever stuff will fly out of his mouth at light speed, and it, like, will take you like a millisecond, and then it's so funny. And the guy playing his love interest is so hot. I've never seen him before. I was like, who is this? And I was talking to my neighbor, and she's like, he's in a lot of Hallmark movies. And then I was like, oh my God, they make a lot of Hallmark movie jokes in the movie. And I wonder if that was like a reference.
I want to watch this now.
Yeah, it was really funny, really great. And it's needed, like, to have like these really great LGBTQ plus rom-coms like out in the mainstream. I feel like there's been quite a few on like Netflix and Hulu, but they really haven't broken like into the theater realm, right? I don't think I've seen one. And he's really breaking the fourth wall in a way in the first like opening monologue of the movie, which is really fun. He's like a podcaster, and he's talking about how he's had all these opportunities, and one of those opportunities is to write a movie. and it's good. You gotta check it out.
Yeah, there was I think it was called Fire Island on Hulu. It was a Pride and Prejudice retelling. It was so funny.
Wait, he did that?
No, I'm just thinking of an LGBTQ plus like retelling that or a movie that I've watched.
Oh, okay.
And it was,
but it wasn't in the theater.
Fire Island.
Yeah,
no,
it's Hulu.
It was on Hulu.
Okay. And I tried to watch Disenchanted, but like halfway through, I wasn't liking what was happening, so I turned it off.
I can't believe you didn't finish it. You didn't give it a chance.
I gave it halfway through. That's a lot of a chance. I was getting sad.
You didn't finish it though.
But I just like didn't like that there wasn't much romance happening, and I didn't like.
Yeah, this one's not about romance.
Yeah, it wasn't as
It's about,
grounded.
like, family.
Because there's a lot of, this one they go into like a fairy tale version of the world, whereas the other one is the opposite. And I loved how grounded it was in that, like, everything that was fairy tale was so clever. And in this one, I mean, there's clever stuff, but it's like everywhere. It's just not as like, I don't know. It's not as precious when it happens. But I will finish it.
Did you get to the love power scene?
I got to the scene where she was singing with, oh my gosh, what's the SNL actress? Maya? Is that her name? Maya Rudolph. They were doing their
That's so
song
good.
together.
And they're just like dancing.
I didn't like it.
I love that scene.
I like stuff when they're all together, the family, but they're all separated. Boo.
Yeah. My favorite is the love power scene. Or my other weirdly, like, small favorite scene is when James Marsden comes on screen again and he goes, Robert!
That's like the very beginning.
I love it. I died.
All right, what did you watch on TV this week?
Okay, I'm changing what I wrote down.
Okay.
Okay, so Alex has been watching Welcome to Wrexham, and I know you watched it.
I watched the first episode.
Oh, I thought
And
you watched
some of the
whole
second
thing.
episode.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
Okay. I think he's pretty much watched the whole thing. We've been watching it together. Slow. I've kind of been watching it, but I really like it because freaking Ryan Reynolds is so funny. Just like in his everyday life, he's just on all the time.
I love him.
And there was a whole episode about their bromance, but it was called romance with a W because of Wrexham. Wrexham is spelled with a W.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a freaking hilarious
I have to watch the rest of this. It was like, the thing is that's holding me back is soccer. And I know it's football, but I'm just not interested in sports, but I know it's about them more and about the town and the people in it. And they were talking a lot about the football players, and that's where I think I paused and I haven't gone back.
Yeah. And the reason why we were watching is because like the World Cup is happening right now. And I don't really care about that, but Alex does and all of her friends do. So I'm just kind of like in it. But anyways, I think it's really good. And I think even if you're not into sports, you would really enjoy it. Yeah. I've also been watching Willow. I didn't talk about this last week, but I went to an event and they showed us the first 2 episodes. It's streaming right now on Disney Plus. It's like if you're missing Rings of Power and House of the Dragon, this is like a really great show to fill the void of our fantasy shows being gone. And I love fantasy so much, and this is so good. It's by Lucasfilm. It's picking up where the Willow movie dropped off back in the 80s. So the first movie is from Lucasfilm, and it's with Val Kilmer. And it still has that bit of 80s charm to it. So it kind of feels like a Goonies meets Lord of the Rings, and they go on this adventure. And all the cast is super young and super funny, and it has like, modern language. Not super modern, but like they're all pretty witty and hilarious. And I love it, and I can't wait to watch more of it. And it's so good.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. It doesn't sound like my cup of tea, but
I think you would like it because it's funny.
I just don't like the Goonies and I don't like the Lord of the Rings so much. So it sounds like two things I don't like.
Oh my gosh. I just love fantasy.
I've been on an anti-fantasy kick, I guess, for a little bit. I mean, I could always be sucked into a fantasy if it's good. I just haven't been even giving it a chance because, you know, you just don't feel like it. That's where I've been. But I didn't really watch any TV this week other than, again, The White Lotus because I'm writing my book, so I'm
I'm caught up.
Oh my God, isn't it so good?
It's much better than season 2.
You mean season 1?
It's good.
You mean season 2 is much better than season 1?
Yes.
Yes. It's just so masterful in the way that they paint these characters this season, where it's like everyone's morally gray and you just can't tell if you like someone. Like you'll be like, oh, I like this character, and then something will come up and you're like, no, I don't. And then they'll bring you back around like, oh, okay, maybe I do. That's what humanity is like. Like we're all, you know, flawed, and it's kind of like a balancing act. Like, where do you draw the line? And it's always moving around, and it's just really, really well done in this show. And I'm so excited. There's only one more episode left, I think. Next week's the finale, so we'll see.
Oh.
We'll see who dies this season.
Aren't there 4 bodies?
I'm not sure, like, how many bodies there were in the beginning. Like, and, you know, they could always be not all the people we know.
That's
true. So.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm very curious, though. There's definitely going to be one. There will definitely be one main person.
Yes.
All right. Well, you watched, it looks like, One More Thing. Do you want to tell us about that?
I think I'll wait until next week because I just dipped into it.
Oh, all right. So you get more of a feel of it. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then let's move on into our main discussion today, which is a big one. I feel like that kind of weighs on you in different ways at different times in your life, and it's the idea of growing out of YA. And I first started to hear this, of course, in my very early 20s, and it really pissed me off back then because, of course, I'm still a fucking young adult, and everyone who was telling me this was a fucking young adult. And if you're new to my content, I kind of die on the hill of you're still a young adult till you're like 25. Honestly, it wasn't until I turned 30 that I was like, damn it, am I not a young adult anymore? Like, is it technically just adult now? Like, you're still evolving and really learning about yourself and how to be an adult all through your 20s. So when I was first making content on YouTube when I was 20, 21, 22, and people were like, why do you only read YA? And it's like, first of all, no, I don't only read YA. I read whatever I have been hearing about that's really good. If it's really good, I'm gonna read it. And a lot of that happened to be YA because I was a young adult with a young adult audience. And yes. I would see people from like year to year being like, oh, I've grown out of YA, like, oh. And it was said in the most condescending way. And I feel like I don't think that's the right way to frame what you're feeling, like, as you kind of age up and you just want to read about people having different issues that just happen to happen, you know, as you get a little older. And that's what's happening now. I feel like a lot of things in YA, I've just grown tired of some of the tropes because I have been reading them for 10 straight years. You know, it's just like anything else. If you keep eating the same thing, you want to change it up. And so, okay. I'm going to pose a question here. I feel like we should start off with like the pros of YA literature, because I don't think everyone has a like really firm idea of what makes something young adult. And honestly, in my opinion, it's getting more and more blurred as I read more different things. So what makes something YA to you?
Well, I think the thing is, it's like we were reading books about, 18, 19-year-olds sometimes in school, but they weren't really considered young adult. They were like adult books. I think you could say it would be like a character who's young, but I think it's, I don't know.
You want me to tell you? You want me to tell you what?
Yeah.
I think over here. Okay. So honestly, I think the biggest factor should be the age of the protagonist, because you, especially at that age, are looking for guidance and validation, and you are always looking for that when you're going through something, but especially when you're just coming into adulthood. Everything is new, everything is for the first time, and you really want to read about other people going through these same emotions. And so YA tends to be when the protagonist is anywhere between like the ages of 15 and, for me, I want to say like 23, 24. But for the publishing industry, not even the publishing industry, like the book sales industry, they tend to cut it at like 19. So like technically young adult is the age of the protagonist falling anywhere between 14 and 19. And technically, a lot of the time, they don't have super adult themes. So when I was writing Again But Better, and I'm like pushing the quote boundary of young adult by making her 20, and she's in college and she's drinking, and any of these college aged YAs that have come out in the last like 5 years have been trying to do the same thing, like push it, because you're reading young adult all through your 20s, and you want to read about people that are also doing the things that young adults do in their 20s. And there was a lot of like going to different pubs and stuff, because she's studying abroad in London. And I remember being asked to just like take out the names of like alcohol, so just it's not drawing as much attention to that they're drinking, even though it's legal. It's not even like in the United States when you're like in college and you're drinking and it's illegal. It's like they're in the UK and it's legal to drink, I think, at 15 or 16.
It's 18.
Yeah, but I feel like with a parent, it's like 15 or 6. It's like earlier. It's weird. There's like rules for like when you're with a parent.
That's weird.
Unless that's just Canada, I can't remember anymore. But anyway, we're 20 at the time, so all the characters are 20. I'm saying we're like, I was 20 when I was studying abroad there, and the characters are also 20, and it's legal. So, but they just didn't want it in there, and a lot of times, and this is also being pushed, I think, in recent years, like a lot of times, it won't get too sexually graphic, and I've seen like more graphic, obviously, with Sarah J. Maas. There's these authors that are pushing those boundaries. Like, people just coming into Sarah J. Maas, I don't know if you realize that all of those books were in the young adult section. And when you get to the end of Throne of Glass, there are some very sexy scenes, like in the 5th one on a beach. I always remember that. I was like, this is YA. And so
are you talking about Throne of Glass?
I'm talking about Throne of Glass number 5, I believe it is. I'm thinking of a specific scene with Rowan. Do you remember? Have you read that one?
Got it.
Okay.
I haven't. No, I'm on Air of Fire.
All right. Well, they've got some like fire abilities, these characters, and they're like in the sand having some sexy time, and the sand like fuses into glass around them. It's a very memorable scene.
Oh my.
Anyway, so like the pros of YA are that it's like usually very easy to jump into a young adult book. They want to make it accessible to people who maybe haven't found the joy of reading yet. So you jump in and you realize that reading is fun instead of having it be very dense and verbose. Like some classics are, a lot of classics when you're in school are very verbose and dense, and that makes people think they don't like reading. And then you discover a YA book and you're like, oh wait, books can be fun. And they're a lot of times they're,
And it's just why.
yeah,
I just want to know, why aren't we allowed to read like YA books in school? Like, why are we meant to read these
classics.
dense
I feel like
classics?
teachers more and more are including more young adult. I think when we were in school, young adult was just having its, I don't want to say renaissance, it was just being birthed really after Twilight. The most famous one before that was The Golden Boys. Is that what it's called? I never read it. That's what it's called, right? Pony Boy.
Oh, yeah.
That book. What is that called?
Yeah.
The Outcast. Or something.
Yeah.
What the fork is that called?
Well, my aunt, I remember, I think it's called The Outcasts.
Okay.
The Outsiders. Thank you,
The
Shelby.
Outsiders. The Outsiders. Oh my gosh. That was like the YA. And of course there were books written like Catcher in the Rye about young characters, but they weren't considered YA because there just wasn't as many books, so there wasn't a section for it, you know?
I was going to say my aunt is an English teacher, and when I was getting books, like when I was getting an abundance of books from publishers, I would just give her all of mine, and she would be reading the same things that I would be reading. Like, she would ask me, like, what are you reading right now? Like, I want to know. And then I would like lend her all my books, and then she would give those out to all of her students. And then I ended up I remember just giving like 2 huge containers of novels and being like, here, have them for your high school students. But my aunt's cool, so she would have everyone be reading like young adult novels that actually make sense.
Yeah, I mean, you learn a lot from those books. You gain a lot of confidence from those books. Like, I'll never forget reading Divergent for the first time and how much that book empowered me to be brave, just simply to like take risks and do things. And to like face my fears and stuff. There's so much that young people can take from these books. And Nicole just said it's hilarious that some adults try to act like YA isn't relatable anymore when you're adult, because everyone who is an adult was a young adult. Yeah, and the thing is, like, the point I was trying to get to, that there's a lot of, middle ground to cover, but I feel like you just, again, like, you read a ton of young adult and you're like, okay, I want to read about a different age. Like, you read a lot about teenagers, and it's not that the books are any like below other books. If they're good books, they're good books. But you just, once you read about a ton of teenagers and you're not a teenager anymore, you start to have this urge, like, okay, what happens when you're older? Like, I remember, like, I really, really wanted to read a book about someone in their early 20s when I was in my early 20s, after reading like 15 to 20 books about people who were like 16, 17. I was like, okay, what about people in their early 20s? Like, why is there no section? And that's why when I started writing my first novel, I was like, this character is going to be 20. This is the book that I needed to read, because I felt so weirdly old and young at the same time when I was 20. Like, I felt like so inexperienced, because I hadn't gone through anything that all of these characters in young adult literature were going through yet. I was like, and I'm 20, like, I'm not a teenager, like, I should be like experiencing all this stuff. I feel like so behind. And it's because I didn't have any books to be like, oh, okay, there's people out there just like me. I'm surrounded by all these college students doing all this shit, and I'm just sitting here in my dorm room, like, alone with no friends. Like, there was no book to like comfort me and make me feel like that was okay, that I was struggling, and that I was still like hadn't gone out in the world and done all this shit. And that's why I wrote Again But Better. And that's why I feel like a lot of authors have tried to like get college age stuff
A segue into
the YA section.
Oh, sorry.
What were you gonna say? No, you go.
Oh, no, I was trying to finish your thought.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was trying to finish your thought. No, I just think it's really interesting how all the like authors we are reading now are also trying to make that jump
From
into like from YA to like older, more mature themes?
So that's another thing. Like a lot of authors that came up while we were reading all this young adult, like while our YouTube channels were coming up, they are shifting to debut adult novels because, yeah, after writing about teenagers for 10 years, it's natural to want to write about different themes because a lot of times the themes are similar. Like a lot of YA tropes, you got the chosen one, you got the dystopian society. And I think these come up obviously in other genres too. Not even genres. YA is a section, not really a genre, but they come up in different sections of the bookstore as well. Obviously, in adult, there's chosen one and dystopian and like miscommunication, but it happens really. You can count on it a lot in young adult. You just see the new moon trope where it's like, I'm breaking up with you for your own good. So often, and I just cannot stand that one anymore. I remember after New Moon, I was like, stop copying New Moon. That book was torture for me. And it's like kind of a staple. If there's more than one book, then in the second book, they're breaking up. And I hate it.
I also find it in YA, I think, especially in like fantasy or urban fantasy or science fiction, especially like in the chosen one trope, you're always finding these characters dealing with extremely mature themes like grief, having to lead a society. Like these young characters are having to grow up so fast, and there's no way any of us would ever be able. I mean, you could if you were in that situation, but I feel like these characters are put in such mature positions of power that it's crazy that those characters don't come with the other mature aspects of being an adult if you're in that position. And so such as like intimacy with others and drinking and like they're literally killing kids, but you're not going to have sex.
Well, that's the thing here. Like, that's where like the line of like it is YA is, because in all other aspects of what they're dealing with, it's relatable to anyone, and it's that idea that you want to, like, when you're a little older and you're like, okay, I want to see them have the sex scene. I want to see them, experiencing these other mature things. And there are YAs, again, that are pushing that boundary as well. Like, for example, like the Six of Crows, Crooked Kingdom, like these characters are like mob bosses. They're in like a heist crew. One of them is, she's forced to work for like a house of prostitution. Like they're all like 16. But they're like drinking, dealing with drug abuse, like doing all this stuff, and this is considered YA, but it's kind of like it sneaks in there because it's fantasy, and that's the same with like Throne of Glass. They get away with it much more when it's a fantasy premise. You can see a lot more, like, I guess, mature themes, even though it's quote YA, because the characters are 15. And those end up being really interesting young adult reads because it blurs the line so much. Kaz can literally float on his brother's dead body, but God forbid sex happens. I mean, I feel like there is some fade to black sex in Six of Crows.
That's the thing. It's fade to black.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't have to read a super graphic sex scene. It's all about like the lead up for me. Like the lead up is really the best part. I feel like when you're reading a Sarah J. Maas novel, sometimes it's like, oh, this is like a great sex scene, and sometimes it just like keeps going, and I'm like, I don't need this. It just keeps going and going, and I'm like, I can move to the next scene now. I got what I came for, that tension and the breaking of it. And then like once it keeps going, I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I want that, sometimes I'm fine. So
yeah. Sometimes like once characters come together for me in like a book, I'm like, okay. Like if it happens too early, I'm like, I'm a little bored now. Then now what?
YA is a lot about that slow burn and
Yeah.
that tension and that all the really fun parts, like the banter and the
Mm-hmm.
growing of the relationship and yeah, so it's not like imperative, I feel like, for all these people to have like graphic sex scenes. I think the Fade to Black works for me. For me, it's more like I want to see them just be a little older and dealing with like slightly older stuff and have that still be considered YA, because there is
Mm-hmm.
no section to go to because new adult isn't really a section um, at the bookstore.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny how like we started, especially in the early days of BookTube, after we were kind of getting out of YA, but not really, and then we're like, oh, here are new adult books, which are basically just romance books with like kids in college, and how much we were yearning for that, but the new adult book section, as I put air quotations up, was literally filled with just Twilight fan fiction that was published.
Was it even a new adult book section, or was it just the romance section?
That's it. It was just romance, but everyone was saying it's new adult.
Yeah.
Because there is no really such thing as, I mean, on Amazon, I guess there is a category that's new adult, but all of these books, and that's why I started reading fan fiction, was because of the Fade to Black scene in Breaking Dawn. I'm like,
I love that
up.
scene. I read that
Hold
so
up.
many times.
Yeah, but I wanted more.
I just remember like the
And-
specific descriptors so well, because I was like, oh my god, their sex scene. Like they laughed and their bodies fell together differently. Like, do you remember that line?
Oh, and then they woke up and the feathers were everywhere and the headboard was broken. I'm like, what the fuck just happened? I want to know.
I knew what happened.
No, that wasn't enough for me. This is how I was brought to fan fiction, because I started being like, did anyone fill this in? I went to fanfiction.net. I started looking up like the Twilight, like Edward and Bella Breaking Dawn scenes, and believe me, there was a ton of them, but there was like definitely one that people were like, this is the best one. But everyone had their like different version of that scene, and so I just read the chapter like over and over again from like multiple authors' point of view, and I'm like, this is great. I love this stuff. Fan fiction's amazing.
That's hilarious.
Well, and it's what like literally like that Fade to Black scene is what made some of these authors so famous, because they also wanted to fill in those spots, and they also wanted to see their most beloved characters experience different stages of life. Like, that's why I love fan fiction, is because I can still sit with my favorite characters and in a world, or sometimes a different world, and they can experience different things I never got to see in like the real,
the canon book. Yeah. Circling back to that new adult section that was full of Twilight fan fiction that had been, kind of not repurposed, but like they changed the characters' names so that they were like separate novels so that they could be sold. And I think because a lot of it was like more sexual and a lot of it was coming out of Twilight, and Twilight had this stigma, that new adult got this stigma, and then it kind of, the idea of new adult came and fell very quickly because of the stigma. Like, no one wanted to call their books new adult because the Twilight stigma followed to new adult, and then new adult had a stigma, and then no one wanted their book to come out and have a stigma because of the label new adult. So we kind of dropped that label. There's still no section.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I just think it's crazy again how Twilight changed the industry, and how so many authors now have a name because of Twilight. I mean, it's what inspired you to start writing, but some of these people were literally just writing romance books with Edward and Bella, and then one person got their book published and they're like, okay, well, I have like 30,000 readers, I'm going to publish this book as well. And it started so many people's careers, because they were horny and they wanted to explore those themes with their favorite characters.
Yeah. Andrea just said that it could be argued too that perhaps in this age of social media and just the fact that it's 2022, that teenagers are dealing with mature topics and situations in their everyday lives now. So for YA to edit that maturity out of those books is a disservice to all those growing up right now. And I mean, I definitely agree, but I think that teenagers have been dealing with mature content in their everyday life forever. Since the beginning of time. And, you know, it's just censorship that, like, parents are scared of. I feel like they're teenagers delving into these topics and they want to pretend that if they shelter them enough that they'll never have to deal with it. But the fact of the matter is that it just comes up. And if you feel like you're in the dark about it, you're less prepared and it's scarier and you don't know what to expect. Yeah, topics become taboo and there becomes like shame. It arises around like even more around like sexual stuff. I mean, there's already so much shame in America around sexual content. And because of how religious of a country we are, and the idea that it's not it's like taboo to read a sexual scene is just adding to that shit. It is just adding to that fire. You're absolutely right. And yeah, it's condescending in general. And I feel like this is also so how I feel when I'm writing my books that like will be quote YA, but they're in their early 20s. And sometimes I'll get a note like in copy edits or something. I remember getting a specific note about Better Together about a part of it toward the end. And how, like, maybe I want to write, like, a paragraph about what this is. And it was, like, something that circles back from the beginning. And I'm like, no, they can understand that. That's what reading's about, like, putting the pieces together. Like, there's this simplification, this urge to simplify things because it's, quote, young adult. And I'm like, young adults are very smart. Like, especially readers. Like, that's part of the joy of reading is putting stuff together yourself and figuring it out and just like serving it on a platter. That's not fun to read. And it doesn't really add anything to the story. Yeah.
What do you think, like for yourself while you were writing, like Again But Better or Better Together, like what do you think you were pushing so hard for the publishers to understand about the kind of book you wanted to write?
I mean, with Again But Better, it was way more intense because it was like my first book. And when it was first on submission, I talked to a few editors that were like, okay, well, we definitely have to age this down. Like, she has to be 18. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. And I was like, no. Like, the most important part of this for me is that she is 20 and all of this is happening to her. Like, that's the whole point. And that's why I wrote that forward. So my editor now, she was really great and like, was like, no, we're going to keep her 20, like, but we have to do certain things to make sure that the booksellers will still put us on the shelf, because that's the problem ultimately. Like, the booksellers sometimes, if the character's older than 19, won't put it in the young adult section. And if it's not there, then people can't find it. So she said that I should write everything that I just said in like a letter to the reader. And that's why I have that reader's letter at the beginning of Again But Better. And I get so many people messaging me about that reader's letter specifically, and like taking pictures of that and being like, this is why I picked up the book. And this is so I'm really, really grateful that I did that, because it really explained why it was so important to me that she was 20. Like, it wasn't so important to me that you like see their alcohol, and it wasn't so important to me that you like know what their sex scene looks like. But the fact that they're dealing with college issues was important to me, because that stuff you don't see. You know, like, it kind of prepares you mentally for that experience when you've read about it. You know, that's why I think now we're naturally gravitating toward things with older characters, because like I want to know what life is like married. Like I want to know what life is like with your kid. I want to know like about those struggles and like how mentally people deal with them. And when I was if I had known anything about college before, and if I had read A Gamma Better before going into college, like I feel like I would have just been so much more mentally prepped for what I was going into, but I had no idea, no context for what it was going to be like. Nicole just said the main reason I read Fangirl when I was in college is I just wanted to read about someone in college so badly. Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted. And for Better Together, I started off with the characters being like 22 and 23, but I needed to age them down. So I had her being 19 and the other one is 21. But like specifically, she hadn't turned 21 yet. She was 20 and she's going to be 21 in a month. Like, and that's
had to be strategic.
I had to be strategic about it. And I just don't want to do that anymore. My next book, she's 23. She is 23. And I feel like for my fourth book, I want to venture into adult just because I am to the point where like I want to write about more mature things. I want to explore that through writing. Like that's how I feel like that's how I make sense of almost like the things I've learned is writing about them through other characters' eyes and exploring them through writing. And I want to write about being in your late 20s. Like that's what is fresh in my mind. And that's when you connect the most with readers, is when you're really in it. And the further you get from that age, the harder it is to connect as intensely. You know, that's why Again But Better, I feel like connected so hard, because I was fresh out of it. Yeah. Anyway, I just went on a rant about about my books and young adult and all that stuff. So I wanted to ask you, like, what content, well, I kind of talked about what content and YA that was left out for you. What kind of YAs do you read now, or are you reading YA? Have you gravitated completely away from it?
I just try and think about this. I think the last YA I read was probably over a year and a half ago. I think I read Julie Murphy's Pudding, and then I read Christina Lauren's LGBTQ book. I can't remember what it was called, but
autobiography.
I really haven't been reading YA because I'm just so in that adult romance world. Like that's all I really want to read. And I felt like when I started BookTube, like I wanted to venture out into those worlds, but I kind of felt stuck in the YA world, and I'm not mad about it at all, because I read a lot of great books. But I think it's funny how a lot of our YA books that we were reading back in the day when we were in early BookTube are now adult books. Like some of my favorite books are now adult books, like all of Sarah J. Maas's books. Red Rising is now an adult book. It wasn't a YA at the time. And I've always wanted like more. And I think that's because I grew up in such like a Christian conservative household. It wasn't like I was told not to read that stuff, but like I say I grew up in a Christian conservative household, but like my family has been very loose and lax about the kind of content we've experienced. Like Alex and I watched Silence of the Lambs when we were 8 years old. I was watching Sex and the City at like 11 with my mom. Like these are the kinds of things I was watching in media, and they weren't matching what I was reading. And I'm like, I need something more. I don't know. I just like my brain wanted, I wanted more of everything. And I wanted to know what life was like having a career. I think that was the main thing. Was like, I didn't go to college. Don't really care about college life because I can't connect. I wanted to know what it was like to be a career-driven woman, and all that stuff. And then, I mean, in the fantasy books, I just always think it's so ridiculous that fantasy, like young adult fantasy books, are like kids in 16, 17, and they're dealing with all this really intense stuff. And I was dealing with really intense stuff. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I can't connect with this, because I just feel like it's outlandish that they're having to deal with all this grief and still continue on. And I just think it would be more best suited for an adult character. And yeah, that was my rant.
Well, I understand why, though, they've aged them that way, because I think it's still like you still want to read about those things as a young adult, and their parents sometimes will restrict what you read, and if it's not in that section, then maybe they wouldn't let them read it. But it's important to be exposed to all sorts of things throughout your teens, you know, and hopefully read very diversely, and you don't have to, hopefully, like, that's the thing, like, YA has its pros. Like, there's a reason why they're that age. It's like kind of, it's like a hack to get all those themes in, but also have it still be accessible to the 15, 16-year-olds that want to read about it. And you don't want to, like, gate them out of it. And it's also easier to find it. That's the thing, too. Like, these are really enjoyable to a youthful audience. And if it's not in the young adult section, the rest of the bookstore is a blob. It's hard to find anything. And so as I've, like, gotten older and ventured more into adult, like, rom-coms, romance, I've just started to see, like, that they're very close to YA, except they're sex scenes. Like, that's
very similar.
They're very similar. They're very voicey. I was like, so as I have been reading all of these rom-coms in the past year, it's kind of frustrated me just with my own books. I was like, my books are romance novels. Like, they just don't have this, like, intense sex scenes, and the characters are a little younger. I'm like, what is the difference? It's just, like, more mature because the characters are a little older, but, like, it's the same sort of feel when you're reading it. So that's also made me think that, like, okay, well, I'm just going to write, I guess, adult romance next. Like, because I want to write people that are older, and that's the way I write anyway. Like, romance tends to be very voicey, like, very fun, very, like, easy to jump into. It's not very, like, overwhelming and dense like adult fantasies can be. It's a very fun place to be. Like, it's a very accessible reading genre.
I also think the marketing standpoint, or like marketing for books, is for romance books, has evolved to be very similar to young adult books. And the way that we now have illustrated covers of romance books versus the very intense models on covers that our grandmas or our mothers were reading. It's now very similar to the books that we were reading when we were younger. And we don't feel as much that there's such a stigma behind reading a romance book. Because I always felt like, I'm not going to read romance because the covers are crazy.
Yeah.
And
exactly. Now they're adorable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you would never know the X-rated content behind the covers.
And that's why I think there's like a very like natural crossover into romance. Like my chiropractor just asked me to recommend some books for his daughter for Christmas, and she's 14, I think. So I'm like, do I recommend any of the really good like adult romances that I've read, or is that crossing the line? I'm assuming I should just stick to young adult, but I don't know.
Just stick to young adult. I always tell if someone asks me for a recommendation, there's no romance in that. No, I always say like the selection, because I feel like that I gave that to all of my like younger cousins, and they like absolutely devoured that series because it was still horny. But
Oh my god.
But it was.
I don't think that had as much. I didn't like that one as much because there wasn't as much. I was more frustrated reading that than I was excited about
That's
the
true.
romance. But let me ask you this. Coming off the heels of there not being as much of a stigma about romance books now, do you still feel the stigma about YA from the general public? Like around Twilight time, there was most definitely an enormous stigma against the phrase, like, I'm reading a YA novel. And I feel like that's evolved, but does YA have a stigma in your mind now that you've kind of moved to a different genre? If you heard something was really good and it had, like, it was YA, are you not going to pick it up because it's developed a stigma?
Probably in my mind, because I've always reached like basically since for like the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've reached for adult novels. Like I'm looking for stuff romance, like fantasy romance novels or paranormal romance novels. Like that is the kind, like I want a great fantasy, but with some spicy times. And that's what I want right now as like someone in their late 20s who's single and who doesn't get to experience a lot of that in her own life. And so in my mind, I think YA is stigmatized, where I'm like, oh, it's YA. I don't know if I'm going to read it because I don't know if it's going to push the boundaries that I'm always used to. But if it's something that like everyone is obsessing over, or like, I think I'm going to read Percy Jackson. That's one of the reasons why I didn't read it, is because I started hearing about it when I was much older. And now everyone's talking about it. I mean, you've been talking about it forever, but I'm like, I want to know, like, if everyone's freaking out about how good this is, then I guess I should probably read it. I love Harry Potter. So
it's middle grade. But it's very,
I know, it's even
very
younger.
clever. It's got a silliness to it. Like it's got a lot more comedy than Harry Potter, but it's got a lot of Greek mythology, cleverness. It's great. But on that note, that you now feel a stigma in YA, this is also what is frustrating for me, because I'm trying to push that in my books, but they're still called YA. And so anybody who is thinking like you're thinking, and they look at my book and they're like, oh, it's YA, instantly like, oh, I don't think I want to pick that up, even though I'm like, no, it's college YA. It has a lot of romance. It has mature themes. Like, these are the issues that you're dealing with as you're coming into adulthood. Like, these girls are trying to make their careers. Like, they're falling for people. They're exploring their sexuality in different ways. Like, it's a whole thing. Like, it's a whole thing.
I mean, I'm very excited about your third book. I just want to put that out there, and I will obviously be devouring it. I think it's funny, though, Ali Hazelwood, who wrote The Love Hypothesis, she is diving into YA, coming from being an adult author.
Yeah,
like
that's
her
what
next,
Casey
I think she just signed a
McQuiston
deal
did as well.
Yeah, and I'm like, this is very interesting, because I know she writes a lot of extremely spicy scenes. Like, I think even spicier, Christina and Lauren, some of the books can be spicy, but not all of them can really push some of the boundaries. But so I think that's interesting. I don't know if like I want to read it. Like when she announced it, I was like, oh, I was wanting more.
But like the thing is, it could still be really, really good and just not have as graphic of a sex scene, you know, like that's the thing here. Like, we're now putting all of YA into the capsule of YA when we were reading it in the early 2010s. And now everyone is starting to push the boundaries more and more. So it really depends on how old the characters are. I feel like if you see the characters 18, 19, like, they're pushing it. If it's like a 16, 17-year-old, they're probably not going to push it as much. But like, since 19 is like the quote cutoff, like that's what you put if you want them to be as adult as possible. But yeah, like, but there's more and more early 20s ones cropping up that they don't advertise that as hard, though, I feel like, because of the sales aspect with the stores. It's just a whole paradox, trying to make YA more open. They need a new name for the early 20s if they're not going to let early 20s be part of YA.
I know. But I think that comes back to the point of YA is such a safe place for kids to experience older themes, and how parents will let their kids read it because it is a young adult novel. And I think that's such a good point.
It's all with the marketing, though, like, because if young adults don't know that they're young adults, how will they find your young adult novel that's for them? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, how am I in college going to know that this is the book that I want to read? Unless somebody specifically told me, because it's not in a section in the bookstore that I'm looking at. And even like the marketing for it, like the covers of Better Together, for example, don't look like the age that they are. I feel like they look a little younger because of how the girls are framed in their bedrooms, and the girls are dealing with like the stuff you deal with after college. So it's a whole kind of balancing act with like trying to leave stuff accessible, but also like have the right audience find your book, even though the marketing people are like, this is for people 12 and up, because that's YA. So it's a whole thing. And I do feel like there is a stigma for people in their 20s reading YA. Like, it's dumb that there is, but there is. And like, it develops because of the tropes we saw over and over again in the early 2010s. That's how a lot of people see YA. That's how you see YA. Like, it just gets stuck in your head as something that's limited. And it's really hard to expand that. And I'm just tired. I'm tired of hearing the rules. I remember, like, I remember a different editor took a look at, like, my outline for this third book, and they were like, oh, yeah, well, I think she's a little old. And I was like, no. You don't know that I die on the hill of old YA. But, like, I'm just tired of hearing that. It's just, like, it irks me. I'm like, I'm not writing a teenager.
Yeah, I think, and Andrea brought up a good point. She goes, bro, I'm gonna be 45. I'm still feeling like a young adult. So, and that's how I feel like my aunt is. Like, I feel like I'm probably gonna get out of this cycle where I think, like, I don't really want to read young adult. I want to read older things. And I'm gonna get a little bit older, and I'm going to appreciate those stories, because then I'll be able to relive what it feels like to be that age with a younger body and not have creaky joints.
It's also, it's about that thing, like, getting tired of it because you, like, were in it so much, and then you'll come back around, just like everything else. Yeah. So, like, the stigma from the general public, I don't know if I feel that as much. It's definitely there, but I feel like the people in my bubble have kind of adjusted to it. But the stigma has, like, become part of us, I feel like, because of what we did, like our jobs and our YouTube channels. And, like,
we did it so hard.
Yeah, and I feel like all the people in our bubble did it with us. So, like, they also feel it.
We have two dad things. Nicole says my dad is 60 and said he feels the same as when he was in his 20s, which I think is very true. And then Zena says my dad pretty much only reads young adult. He thinks adult books are boring, LOL.
Yeah, if you're not reading the right ones, it is, and it's hard to find the good ones because they don't divide them up.
No,
young adult.
They're just like,
to be fun usually. Go ahead.
I was just in Barnes & Noble, and I'm like, look, I just, like, they have the adult section, like, right next to the YA section at the Grove now, and I was just, like, looking at the shelves, I'm like, oh, there's my romance novel that I love, but it's, like, here next to some boring-ass books that I, like, of Mice and Men. I'm like...
Yeah. It's weird. Like, I've noticed that too. So in the young adult section of Barnes & Noble The Grove, it's right, there's romance right next to it. All of the, like, pop-in rom-coms are right there, and it can be easily confused because there is so much crossover between the rom-com world and the young adult world more and more as the covers become more young adult-like, and less erotica-like. The covers are adult, which is code for boring, Shelby said. Yeah, like, adult covers really just make the book look less interesting. I mean, can we just talk about for a second the new ACOTAR covers? Like, they're just, like,
boring
looking. They look like every other fantasy. I'm just like, they had such nice covers before, but they need to rebrand them so people know they're adult.
Yeah. Like, I love model people covers if they're done like Cassandra Clare's books.
If they're done like the new Cassandra Clare's books, the new ones.
Yes.
Yeah, we're not talking City of Bones.
No.
But yeah, when they're done well, they're done well. Like the Chain of Thorns cover is gorgeous and all. Mm-hmm. The newest series there, oh my god, the Last Hours series by Cassandra Clare is gorgeous covers. But yeah, it's really interesting how it's all evolved in the last 10 years. Like, everyone's trying to push the boundaries. Everyone's trying to, like, kind of very much blur the line between romance and young adult romance and young adult in general. The marketing has just changed a lot. Mm-hmm. Anyway, all right. I think that's going to wrap up our main discussion today. I think there's just so much to talk about on this topic. So if anyone has anything to add, please feel free to email us at thosefuckingfairgirls@gmail.com. We are going to do a feedback episode sometime in the next month or so. Or a month and a half. It depends on how much feedback we get. We need enough feedback to do a feedback episode with your emails, but we're excited to. So please send it to us if you have anything else that you think we should discuss in terms of like episode discussions. Please email us or tweet us at @4fangirlspod or follow us on Instagram and comment there at @thosefuckingfangirls. There's lots of places where you can throw commentary at us. But now we're going to move into the Fuck, Marry, Kill of the Week.
Yay!
Natasha, you're leading us today.
I know. I got to do this one. All right. Fuck, Marry, Kill of the Week. Christine, we have Pilot, Percy, and Miss Peregrine. All the P's.
All right. So Pilot Penn is the love interest from my book Again But Better. Percy is Percy Jackson.
Yes.
And Miss Peregrine from Miss Peregrine's Peculiar Children. Like, yes. Obviously I'm gonna murder Miss Peregrine. I don't know. That one is an easy one. You gave me a nice little murder. Did you read that book? Did you read Miss Peregrine's Hunt for Peculiar Children?
I did.
You did? Okay. Did you like her? Because I feel like she was kind of weird and uncomfortable a lot.
Yeah.
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 Okay, I'm probably going to F Pilot and marry Percy, my forever book husband. I love Percy. This is another reason why you have to read Percy Jackson. He's my husband. You got to get to know him.
I know. Well, I'm going to murder your husband because I don't really know him.
Oh my god. He's wonderful.
I'm sorry. I don't know him. I'll probably marry Pilot, and then I'll just give Miss Peregrine a little kiss. I think her style is cool.
Oh, her style. That's what this is about, really.
Yes, exactly.
Percy only wears orange shirts and Pilot only wears plaid. So obviously Miss Peregrine had to come in here for the fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right. So that was
quick.
That was quick. You gotta do the next week's too. You should do a couple weeks in a row since I've done like the first 6.
Yes.
But before we move into ACOTAR, which we're talking about chapter 8 this week, which we're moving along. The chapters are getting longer. We're doing a read along of A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas if you're just hopping in here. So easy to catch up. We're only on chapter 8, but we're only doing one chapter a week now because the chapters are longer. And so it's easy to hop in. I just said that twice. Anyway, okay. What I was going to say is that in Fangirl Tea Time today, we're going to be discussing our goals and resolutions and such for the new year. We're doing this a little early, but I feel like it's good to be prepared. You got to take the month to mentally prepare for these resolutions for January.
Yes.
So that should be fun. Again, that's in Fangirl Tea Time, our Patreon perk. If you are interested, you can check out our Patreon. Those fucking fangirls, it's in their show notes. But yeah, is there anything else that we were going to say before we move in? Maybe not.
No.
All right. It's time for chapter chat. All right, chapter A of ACOTAR. Natasha, on our scale of rating the chapters, is this next chapter interesting or amazing?
Next chapter.
Yeah, it's definitely a next chapter. It was.
It's not a lot that happened.
It's really a nothing chapter after like a really big chapter. There's nothing. Yeah. Like
the summary of it is that basically like Feyre plans her escape.
Yeah,
but I feel like in the last chapter she'd already come to the conclusion that going back with her that she can't. Yeah. I'm like, what are you doing?
I know. I was just like, can you stop? It's getting old. Like, the thing is, yeah, she spends the whole chapter kind of like pontificating on how she could possibly escape and looking at hiding spots on the grounds and thinking about like Lucien vouching for her to leave. And I'm just sitting here like, what in the world? In what world is Lucien gonna vouch for you to leave? He's even more annoying than I remember.
Yeah. He's really bad.
It's all coming back to me why I didn't love this first book. Because every character is annoying, even Feyre. Feyre's so uptight right now and anxious that we don't even get a sense of her actual personality yet. So it's just annoying Tamlin, annoying Lucien, her annoying family, and Feyre talking about the same thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. She does have this moment outside where she feels something watching her, and I fucking hate this moment too because it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I hate when they feel things and then like they don't immediately know what it is, and we just go back inside the house. And I'm assuming what?
I just think it's so funny though. She's like outside in the gardens, like looking for like places to hide if she needs to, and then like is she hiding in this scene or is she just like standing there?
No, she's just standing.
I feel like she's hiding.
No, I think she's just looking around.
Okay.
She's like exploring the grounds.
I thought she was like getting herself in like a hiding place, and then like Alice is calling for lunch.
I don't
and she's like hiding.
So. No, I think she was like, this would be a good hiding spot, but like not actually hiding in the moment because that's suspicious and weird. But I'm assuming that's the Suriel. Is that what that creepy thing is that she gets the wishes from later on in the book? Spoilers. like a weird being that she interacts with later on.
That's like in the forest though.
No. That's something else. Are you talking about the Weaver?
Oh.
Or
yeah.
Okay. No, there's a Suriel in this one where she gets like wishes or something. I don't remember specifics.
Wishes.
But also there's other monsters in this forest. I don't like all the like unknowns in this book that really don't matter. That's another thing. This feels annoying because we know that she never ends up wanting to escape, really. I mean, you could say maybe in book 3 she does something escapey, but it's not what she's prepping for now, you know?
No. But she does go out into the forest when he tells her not to. And that's what kind of like endears him to her, I think.
Does she though? I don't know. I just remember being annoyed a lot of the time in this book. Tamlin in this chapter actually notices all the calluses on her hands, and he just tells Lucian that Feyre likes to hunt. And Feyre goes, excuse me, bish, I hunt out of necessity? I don't like to hunt. There's no liking. And she,
because I have to.
Yeah, and she steals another freaking butter knife from the table and puts it in a bag in her closet. And I'm just like, you think they don't know that bag is there?
And there's a whole section where she's like, well, I guess I don't have to have every meal with them. That's good. But and it just feels like the last chapter over again. Like they're just having this like very stuck up type of dinner, and Lucian's being an ass. And Tamlin also brings, he's like, hasn't your mother ever taught you this? And then she gets quiet, and then Tamlin's like, there were no findings of a older woman at your house. What happened to your mom? And then she goes into explaining how she died of typhus. At the age of 8. And the thing is, like, she is so stuck up because like she shows a little emotion by telling him this, and like she actually does give him something. And I think it's funny that they share this moment because Tamlin's like, I'm very sorry for your loss. And then Lucian's like looking back and forth at them. He's like, oh, there's a moment. And Feyre's like, I'm not going to let him see my pity. And then she's like,
see my pity? Wait, what do you mean?
Like she doesn't want him to pity her.
Oh, okay.
And so she doesn't really say like thank you. She just leaves. She just leaves. Yeah, this could be easily edited, I feel like, into the past chapter. Like they could have talked about this at the dinner table before. Yeah. And we could have had the same things happen in the outside area. But that's really it for this chapter. It was a quick one, and I was just like, nothing really happens. So excited for chapter 8 next week. 9.
Oh, fuck. Chapter 9. I can't count. I'm excited for chapter 9 next week. That is going to wrap our podcast today. As always, please make sure you're following us and on your favorite podcast app. All of our links are in the show notes. Thank you so much for being with us today. Our podcast is edited by Jake and Alex, and the music is by Cole Jenkins with vocals by Heather Traska. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm Christine.
I'm Natasha. And we're going to go record Fangirl Tea Time, and we'll see you next Friday.
We'll see you next Friday.